What is the difference between Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump? Well, a lot of things, of course. One has humility, integrity, and a deep love for his Christian faith. The other doesn't. But here's another key difference. Jimmy Carter appointed 0 Supreme Court justices in his single term as president, the first president to have no appointees since President Andrew Johnson in the 1860s. Trump, on the other hand, got 3 justices, the most of any one-term president since Herbert Hoover 100 years ago. Yes, appointments to the most important court in the land are basically luck of the draw. By chance, no vacancies opened up during Carter's term, while 2 vacancies opened up during Trump's tenure. The first of his 3 appointments was arguably stolen from Barack Obama with an assist from Mitch McConnell.
The most important decision I've made in my entire political career was not to fill the Supreme Court vacancy when Justice Scalia passed away.
I was shocked that former President Obama left so many vacancies and didn't try to fill those positions.
I'll tell you why. I was in charge of the of what we did the last 2 years of the Obama administration.
I will give you full credit for that. And by the way, take a bow.
That was then Senate Majority Leader McConnell bragging about not only how he blocked dozens of Obama judicial nominees, but how he blocked the nomination of Merrick Garland to the seat on the Supreme Court opened up by Antonin Scalia's death, a seat that would instead get filled by Trump with Neil Gorsuch. Trump, of course, would also go on to nominate Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, both of whom were confirmed by a Republican Senate majority, without a filibuster, by the way. To be clear, there is no overturning of Roe v. Wade last week without the appointments of Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett. And Trump's 3 justices, a third of the entire current court, were chosen, in part because it was believed they'd do exactly what they ended up doing, despite Gorsuch and Kavanaugh saying this at their confirmation hearings.
Senator, again, I would tell you that Roe versus Wade, decided in 1973, is a precedent in the United States Supreme Court. It has been reaffirmed, so a good judge will consider it as precedent of the United States Supreme Court, worthy as treatment of precedent like any other.
This is a precedent that's been reaffirmed many times over 45 years, including in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where they specifically considered whether to overrule and reaffirmed and applied all the stare decisis factors. So that, importantly, became precedent on precedent in this context.
All of that talk of precedent went right out of the window on Friday. In fact, a prominent pro-choice GOP vote in the Senate putting Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court was Maine Senator Susan Collins, a Republican who supports abortion rights, she says. She now says she feels misled by the 2, both based on what they said in their confirmation hearings and in private meetings with her. West Virginia's conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who calls himself pro-life, also blasted the justices, saying he trusted them when they testified under oath. Look, if you're a Republican and even Joe Manchin's upset with you, then you know you've done something wrong. But they don't care. They don't care that their court's legitimacy is being questioned. They don't care that they are making decisions that only a minority of Americans back, because this is not just about Roe. Here are just some of the other decisions this court made in the past 6 days. Last week, in addition to overturning Roe, they expanded the right to carry a gun in public. They limited the enforcement of Miranda rights. You can't sue an officer if they violate those rights. They blurred the separation of church and state by allowing public funds to be used towards religious school tuition. And on Monday, they ruled that public school officials have a right to pray publicly during school events and lead students in prayer. Forget that whole establishment clause, eh? And their term is not done yet. We're still waiting on a decision that could potentially limit the EPA's ability to tackle climate change. And let's not forget that in his concurring opinion on the overturn of Roe, Justice Clarence Thomas specifically said the court should reconsider the cases that gave couples the right to contraception, to have same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage, decisions he called demonstrably erroneous. Look, there is too much at stake here to allow our basic rights, our democracy itself, and the future of the planet to rely on the luck of the draw of vacancies, or the naivete of our lawmakers, or the political gamesmanship of a party that represents a minority of voters. It's no wonder that this court is facing a crisis of confidence. Even the normally restrained USA Today is leading its front page with a story on the court's collapsing legitimacy. A new poll from NPR and Marist finds that confidence in the court is at an all-time low, with 58% of Americans saying they have little or no confidence at all in the institution. So what are Democrats doing about all of this? They're telling us to head to the polls.
The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose, the balance that existed, is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law. No executive action from the president can do that. And if Congress, as it appears, lacks the votes to do that now, voters need to make their voices heard. With your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over.
Ah, yes, Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House. But the rest of us, we just need to vote harder. Yes, I understand that there's not a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. But let's say the Dems defy history and expand their majorities in the House, in the Senate. Let's say they get a bill to codify Roe, to enshrine it in law, to Joe Biden's desk. What's to stop this far-right reactionary court from striking it down? They could. They probably would. That's why I don't understand why there's not more conversation about the court itself and what needs to be done to fix it. All roads, in fact, lead back to the Supreme Court. That's the root of the problem. Winning an election or passing a bill in Congress isn't enough anymore. You also have to do something about this court. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is one of the few who seems to get it.
This court has lost legitimacy. They have burned whatever legitimacy they may still have had. I believe we need to get some confidence back in our court, and that means we need more justices on the United States Supreme Court.
The senator from Massachusetts is right. Unless we deal with the court and rebalance it, cancel out the packing that the GOP has done to the highest court in the land, we won't be able to properly deal with our current democratic crises. Now, that same NPR Marist poll that shows low confidence in the court also found that most Americans oppose expanding the court. So that's that, right? No. There's a pretty simple reason for that poll finding. The leaders of the Democratic Party, including the President of the United States, haven't made the case for court reform and rebalancing, for court expansion. That job can't just be left to Senator Warren or to grassroots activists. Yes, tell people to vote harder, but vote harder in order to fix a broken Supreme Court, right? Right? Joining me now, Dahlia Lithwick, Slate's senior editor and legal correspondent, also host of Slate's Amicus podcast. She's an NBC News and MSNBC law and politics analyst. Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation and author of Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, and Adrian Elrod, Democratic strategist and former senior aide to the Biden-Harris campaign. Thank you all for coming on the show today. Elie, let me start with you. Am I wrong when I say all roads lead back to the Supreme Court, that it's mad for Democrats to talk about gun control or abortion rights or voting rights without dealing with a hard-right Supreme Court that is actively blocking all of that?
Yeah, I've been saying this for about 10 years now, Mendy. If you want something, if you are on the left of center of this country and you want something, you cannot have anything unless you expand the Supreme Court. You're not going to get anything on guns. You're not going to get anything on women's rights. You're not going to get anything on police reform. You're not going to get anything on climate change. You're not going to get anything on anything if you allow 6 conservative justices who are unelected and unaccountable to the people to rule over all. For too long, liberals have ceded the third branch of government to conservative ideology. And as long as we keep doing that, we will keep losing, and we will keep losing hard.
Adrian, Democrats keep saying since Friday, top Democrats, go out and vote, make sure the midterms count, get us a filibuster-proof majority, get us an increased control of the House, which is unlikely. As much as you want people to vote and you want people to give you a majority to codify Roe, you have to deal with the court too. And I don't hear a message from the Democratic Party on court reform.
Well, you know, Mehdi, I think one of the reasons why you don't hear a message is because there is still a divide among Democrats in terms of whether or not we should expand the court. And I'll be the first to tell you, Mehdi, I was sort of on the side of this is a slippery slope, right? Because if we expand the court when we have full control of the House and the White House, then once Republicans get to control, they can inevitably expand the court as well. However, I think a lot of us, after not just Roe, but after the gun bill last week, some of the other Supreme Court rulings that you just showed, this court is not ruling in the favor of the majority of the American people, not even close. We are going down such a disastrous road with this court right now. And I think you are now seeing, after some of the rulings last week, a lot of Democrats taking stock in what's happening and starting to shift course and saying, you know what? We actually have, this may be the only recourse right now that we can take in Congress. And of course, it does take an act of Congress to expand the Supreme Court. It's certainly been done several times in our nation's history. A lot of people in the Democratic Party are saying it is time to do this now.
Can I just respond also to that argument, because it's the one that we hear a lot, right? Yes, if right now the court is 6-3, if Democrats expand the court, let's say they add 10 justices, that makes it 13-6. And you're right, Republicans, if they ever control all of government again, will come back and put 10 more on, and it'll be 16-13. How is that worse? How is a 16-13 conservative control worse than a 6-3 conservative control for a generation? So even kind of the worst case scenarios don't get as bad as the scenario we are living under right now.
I mean, one point I should make for our viewers is not only has the court been expanded several times before, it was also contracted by the Republican Party in 2016 when they kept it at 8 for almost a year. Dahlia, let me ask you this. We're hearing a lot about legitimacy. This word is being bandied about. USA Today has it on its front page Monday. Elizabeth Warren talked about it in that clip I played from Sunday. You are a long-standing observer of and reporter on this court. How bad is this crisis of legitimacy in your view? And what do you say to those who say that the Democrats expanding the court or doing anything to it to make it look more partisan would undermine its legitimacy further?
I mean, the notion that the Democrats would be helping undermine the court's legitimacy when the 6 justices on the conservative supermajority have worked harder than anyone to dismantle its legitimacy is absolutely victim blaming. I mean, it's insane to suggest that the prime offenders here are not the 6 supermajority justices who fly around to conferences and sit next to Mitch McConnell and give speeches about how they hate the press and issue unsigned, unreasoned arguments on the shadow docket. I don't think the Democrats are the legitimacy problem. I think the larger issue is, and this is the one that terrifies me, and maybe it slightly answers the question that Adrian posits of why Democrats are ambivalent about this, is because actually Democrats like institutions. They're not nihilists. And completely destroying the legitimacy of the court is a terrifying prospect in a country guided by rule of law. And so unlike Mitch McConnell, unlike Sam Alito and Amy Coney Barrett, participating in destruction of the legitimacy of the court doesn't redound well to the benefit of anyone. And that's why I think you have this ambivalence to do anything dramatic. But I also think we should be very, very clear that the conversation we are having right now, we should have had in January of 2021.
Yes, we should have had it a long time ago. Joe Biden set up a commission to look into court reform, which basically was kicked the issue into the long grass, which was the purpose of the commission. And even now, he hasn't said anything about it since Friday. Ellie, if Democrats refuse to expand the court, as looks likely, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, they're all on record opposing it. They haven't changed their position since Friday. I appreciate Adrian being open-minded enough to say, well, I did have that view. Now I've changed, when the facts change, I changed mine. We haven't heard that from Biden and co. What else can Democrats do in terms of reform to the court that's not as big not a bigger jump, as court expansion?
Yeah, see, here's the thing, Mendy. Everybody wants to say, like, what's easier than court expansion? Court expansion is actually the easiest thing. All these other things people want to do are actually more radical. So we can talk about jurisdiction stripping, right? The idea that the court can rule laws of Congress unconstitutional is not in the Constitution. That is a power the court gave to itself in 1803 in Marbury v. Madison. Arguably, Congress could take it away and say, you know what, Supreme Court, you can't overrule this act of Congress codifying Roe v. Wade or whatever. But the problem with jurisdiction stripping is that it's going to end up being the Supreme Court that decides whether or not its jurisdiction was stripped, right? It's like, I can tell a shark, you're not allowed to eat me, but the shark is not obligated to listen. So jurisdiction stripping might not work. People want term limits. I want term limits too. The Constitution probably requires an amendment to get term limits, whereas court packing
Whereas
is just a
expansion
simple
does
bill.
not require a constitutional amendment. It's just a simple bill in Congress, simple majority. Should point that out. Let me bring Adrian back into this conversation for the politics of this, because I keep hearing people say, and there's a poll out from NPR Marist that we cited, and the Politico Playbook made this point in their morning email that, hey, it's not popular. The public doesn't even now support expanding the Supreme Court. What I do notice, though, and we put it on screen, is that 62% of Democrats support expanding the court. So if you're the Democratic Party and you want high turnout, your base, your voters support this. I would also point out that I'm kind of tired of people saying you can't back a policy because the public doesn't support it. Doesn't stop the Republican Party from passing all sorts of wildly unpopular policies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, the bottom line is this. This is our moment to do it. I mean, we may not have control, and I certainly hope, Mehdi, this does not happen, but we Democrats may not have control of the House and the Senate for a long time after these midterms. So it's very important to capitalize on this moment now. I also want to say, when it comes to filibuster reform, tell me again, with this divided country, with gerrymandering pretty much locking in a lot of these key races, when are we ever going to have more than 60 members of the Senate from the same party again? So I think as long as the filibuster stays intact, it's going to be very difficult for any progress to get done, because I just don't see a scenario where either Democrats or Republicans are going to have more than 60 senators of their party in the Senate. So something's got to give here. And as Ellie just pointed out, right now, we don't have many options left on the table as Democrats. One of the only options that we do have is expanding the courts. And it's something that can be done in a very simple way with a simple majority. I realize that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are always difficult wild cards for Democrats. But right now, we need to look at every single option, because there is so much at stake. It's not just Roe. It is the safety of our children in schools. It is the safety of our families. There's a lot at stake right now. And this Supreme Court is simply not reflecting the majority and the will of this country.
Yeah, you mentioned Kyrsten Sinema, who constantly falls back on if we get rid of the filibuster, things will be worse in the future. As Ellie pointed out, how can they get worse than they are now? Let's deal with the worst situation we're in right now. Dahlia, let me ask you this about one of the decisions that was released Monday by the court, because Roe was Friday. They haven't stopped moving. Kennedy v. Bremerton School District. Justice Neil Gorsuch writing the opinion for the majority, quote, Joseph Kennedy lost his job as a high school football coach because he knelt at midfield after games to offer a quiet prayer of thanks. Mr. Kennedy prayed during a period when school employees were free to speak with a friend, call for a reservation at a restaurant, check email, or attend to other personal matters. He offered his prayers quietly while his students were otherwise occupied. This is Gorsuch's words in the majority opinion. And yet, as Justice Sotomayor pointed out, pictures speak louder than words in her dissent. She actually put up a picture of what this coach was doing. He wasn't privately minding his own business. He was leading his team in prayer. What did you make of this latest ruling? How consequential is it for the Constitution and for church-state separation?
I mean, it's immensely consequential doctrinally, because the court overturns the Lemon test, which is admittedly fallible, but the test that has existed for decades in terms of determining when the Establishment Clause is violated. It doesn't put a new test in place. The new test seems to be whatever the justices think is okay. And it's also part of, I think, a really terrifying trend that religious liberty is just going to swallow any remnant of the Establishment Clause, and that's the clause that draws a line between church and state. But I think, to your initial question, the real damage to me of this Kennedy opinion is that it is just not true, that all of the things that you just read, Gorsuch saying he was fired, he wasn't, the coach was put on administrative leave, he wasn't privately, quietly praying, he was on the 50-yard line taking a knee, he was refusing persistently to take any accommodation that the school board would offer him because he was on a media tour saying that he was being suppressed in his religious liberty. So the fact that Justice Sotomayor has to be reduced to putting black and white photographs into her dissent to say, not true, not true, not true. In my view, not only is the Establishment Clause absolutely knocked out in this case, but so is the notion of truth. Yeah,
I mean, it's fascinating that in the past, a dissent was along jurisprudential lines, maybe ideological lines. It wasn't meant to be a fact check. And yet the conservative justices now are following their counterparts in the conservative media and in Congress, which is just make stuff up, forget about ideology or forget about jurisprudence. Ellie, your response to the Gorsuch decision on prayer in school?
Talia is exactly right. It's like Gorsuch didn't actually read the brief in the Kennedy case. He watched Tucker Carlson and went from there because his opinion is not grounded in any kind of truth. But this is a long-term project by the conservatives to vitiate the Establishment Clause and superpower the Free Exercise Clause, so that already the conservatives have used the Free Exercise Clause to deny women health care. That was the Hobby Lobby case. They've used it to deny the rights of gay people to get adoption services. That was Fulton v. Philadelphia last year. They've used it just this term, as you pointed out in your open, to mandate that public funds go to parochial schools in Maine. So they've used the Free Exercise Clause to allow for bigotry, to allow for the establishment of religion, and they're not stopping anytime soon. In the same way that conservatives have read out the first part of the Second Amendment so that well-regulated militia no longer exists, they are now reading out the first clause of the First Amendment so that the establishment of religion is now something that they're allowed to do.
Last quick question, Ellie, I've got to ask you while I have you in front of me. I've been meaning to ask you this for a while now. Well, since Friday, I've been thinking about this, as have many, I'm sure. Clarence Thomas, in his concurrence in the abortion case, very conspicuously left out something. He talked about how contraception could be next, gay marriage could be next. Everything has to be revisited, except interracial marriage, which is weird.
Except for Loving, right? Clarence Thomas, married to Ginny Thomas. Loving v. Virginia is the case that allows for interracial marriages. Suddenly, Clarence Thomas doesn't want to touch that, right? But you know who does want to touch that? Indiana Senator Mike Braun, Texas Senator John Cornyn. So, like, the Republicans are coming for Loving, whether Clarence Thomas wants to acknowledge it or not.